In the scorching haze of July 1942, the air above the banks of the Voronezh River seemed thick and still, as if time itself had frozen in anticipation of the inevitable. The city's inhabitants, not yet fully aware of the scale of the approaching storm, watched as columns of black smoke slowly rose on the western horizon. At that moment, orders had already been given in the Wehrmacht headquarters that were to turn this large industrial and cultural center into a key node of global confrontation. Soldiers of Hermann Hoth's 4th Panzer Army already saw the outlines of bell towers and factory chimneys through their binoculars, not suspecting that this place would become the last frontier for many of them. The silence of the summer day was suddenly torn by the growing roar of aircraft engines, and the first heavy shells began to plow the black soil of the Don steppes, heralding the beginning of one of the most tragic and at the same time hushed pages of the Great Confrontation. This story does not begin with grandiose victory communiques, but with confusion, whispers in empty corridors of power, and the heroic despair of those who were forgotten to be warned of the approaching catastrophe. The summer campaign of 1942 was seen by the German command as a decisive thrust to the oil fields of the Caucasus and the vital transport artery of the Volga. The plan, codenamed Blue, implied a crushing blow on the southern flank of the Soviet-German front. Voronezh, in this scheme, occupied a strategic position of the highest importance, serving as a kind of northern lock, holding the entire structure of the advancing group. The city was a major railway junction, connecting the central regions of the country with the southern regions, and its capture allowed the Germans not only to secure their flank, but also to create an ideal springboard for further advance. The Soviet leadership, in turn, had long believed that the enemy's main strike would be directed at Moscow, and therefore the southern direction turned out to be insufficiently fortified. This strategic error led to the fact that by the time advanced German units appeared in the suburbs, organized defense was only beginning to acquire some coherent outlines. The situation escalated to the limit in the last days of June, when German tank wedges broke through the front at the junction of two Soviet armies. The movement of the invaders was so swift that the headquarters simply did not have time to process the incoming information. Streams of retreating troops mingled with columns of refugees, creating unimaginable chaos on the roads. In the city itself, a strange stupor reigned at this time. Official reports spoke of battles of local significance, while the cannonade became clearer and clearer. It was in these days that the foundation of that tragedy was laid, which they would later prefer not to remember in detail. The lack of a clear plan for the evacuation of the civilian population and the suddenness of the breakthrough put hundreds of thousands of people in the position of hostages of circumstances. The external outline of events developed according to the classic blitzkrieg scenario. On July 2, 1942, units of the 4th Panzer Army and the 2nd Army of the Wehrmacht reached the Don River in the vicinity of the city. They were opposed by scattered units, including units of internal troops and hastily formed detachments of the People's Militia. The enormous numerical and technical superiority of the attackers allowed them to dictate terms. On July 5th, a massive assault on the right bank part of the city began. German aviation made hundreds of sorties, turning residential areas into piles of rubble and ashes. The ferocity of the fighting grew with each hour, turning into hand-to-hand combat for every intersection, for every administrative building. Right bank Voronezh gradually turned into a blazing hell, where the line between organized resistance and spontaneous struggle for survival was finally erased. In these critical hours, the figure of Philip Ivanovich Golikov, commander of the Bryansk front, came to the fore. The marshal's personality and his decisions in early July became the subject of many years of debate and hidden discontent among veterans. When German tanks broke into the city blocks, there was a threat of complete encirclement of the defenders of the right bank. In conditions of communication breakdown and growing panic, Golikov decided to withdraw troops to the left bank of the Voronezh River, which effectively meant surrendering most of the city without a direct order from the Stavka of the Supreme High Command. This maneuver allowed the core of some units to be preserved, but left the right bank areas to their fate. Witnesses of those events described scenes of unimaginable confusion when bridges across the river were blown up literally under the feet of retreating soldiers and fleeing townspeople. Many accused the commander of indecisiveness and even cowardice, although the official version later tried to smooth over these sharp edges, presenting the retreat as a forced measure. The internal drama of the city's defenders and its inhabitants was no less profound. Thousands of people were trapped between two fires. Left without leadership and clear instructions, militiamen, among whom were yesterday's students and factory workers, took positions in ruined basements. The motivation of these people was not based on orders from above, but on a personal sense of duty to their native city. However, the lack of heavy weapons and ammunition made their resistance doomed in the long run. On the other hand, the German command was amazed by the tenacity with which their units were met in every quarter. Instead of an easy stroll, they got a protracted urban battle that began to consume their resources intended for the dash to the Volga. The internal choice of each fighter, to stay in position or try to cross the river, became a matter of life and dignity. The ideological clash in this battle was existential in nature. For the Soviet side, Voronezh became a symbol of the first serious test after the defeats of the spring of 1942. Here, the "not one step back" concept, adopted in the form of the famous Order Number 227, was tested for strength. However, the paradox was that it was here that this concept collided with the reality of chaos and incompetence of the higher command staff. The systemic crisis of command led to the fact that the feat of ordinary soldiers became a patching of holes created by strategic miscalculations. From the enemy's point of view, Voronezh was supposed to be an example of their undeniable superiority, but it turned into an unhealing wound on the flank. The ferocity with which both sides fought went beyond military necessity, turning into a struggle for the annihilation of meanings. By mid-July, the situation reached a certain equilibrium, which can be called an equilibrium of terror. The city was divided into two parts: the right bank, occupied by the enemy, and the left bank, held by Soviet troops. The front line passed along the mirror of the river, dividing homes, families, and fates. It was during this period that the formation of what historians would call the Voronezh Front began. A unique situation arose. The city was not fully captured, but it was not cleared of the enemy either. 148 days and nights this confrontation continued within the city limits. German units entrenched themselves in university buildings and hospitals, turning them into fortresses. Soviet artillery from the left bank methodically turned these positions into ruins, making no distinction between military objects and architectural monuments. The city was dying under crossfire, losing its appearance and its population. A cardinal shift in the perception of the battle occurred when it became clear that the attention of the entire country and the whole world was fixed on Stalingrad. While a grand epic unfolded on the banks of the Volga, Voronezh continued its struggle, invisible to major headlines. A significant moment of transformation was the creation and holding of bridgeheads on the right bank, such as the famous Chizovka. The assault on this area in August 1942 became one of the bloodiest local operations. Soviet soldiers crossed the river under continuous fire, gnawing into the steep slopes of the bank and holding onto scraps of land with incredible effort. It was here that true heroism, which needed no official approval, manifested itself. These actions tied up significant enemy forces, preventing them from being transferred to Stalingrad at the decisive moment, which, perhaps, became one of the key factors in the overall victory in the South. At one of the most tense moments of the battles for Chizovka, when the fate of the bridgehead hung in the balance, soldiers and officers displayed miracles of resilience that are difficult to explain by the logic of war. In this regard, a question arises for you, dear viewers. Do you think it is justified to risk entire units for the sake of holding a small piece of territory? If this gives only a ghostly hope for overall success, or should the preservation of the lives of trained soldiers be paramount in the strategy of any military leader? Please write your opinion in the comments, because it is precisely such discussions that help us better understand the complexity of those distant events. Your thoughts are extremely important for a deep analysis of this difficult topic. The culmination of the battle for Voronezh occurred in January 1943. As part of the Ostrogozhsk-Rososh and Voronezh-Kostornoye operations, Soviet troops launched a decisive offensive. The encirclement and defeat of the Second Hungarian Army, which held a significant part of the front in this area, led to the collapse of the entire German defense. On January 25th, the city was finally cleared of invaders. What the liberators saw amazed the imagination even of seasoned frontline soldiers. Voronezh lay in ruins. Almost 95% of the buildings were destroyed or severely damaged. The streets were littered with broken bricks and twisted metal. But the most terrible thing was the absence of people. Of the many thousands of inhabitants, only a handful of those who managed to survive the occupation in basements and dugouts remained in the ruined city. This was a moment of truth. Victory had been achieved, but its price was exorbitant. Why did this grand and tragic battle remain in the shadow of other events? The answer lies in the political conjuncture of that time. Stalingrad became a bright, impeccable symbol of Soviet triumph, while Voronezh bore the imprint of early failures, indecisiveness of the command, and huge losses of the civilian population left under occupation. Mention of Voronezh recalled the difficult days of July, the strange retreat of Golikov, and the fact that the city was actually sacrificed to save the general front. It was easier for historians to focus on the victorious conclusion than to analyze the causes of the catastrophe of early July. Thus, a figure of silence arose, which persisted for decades. The warrior city, the shield city, gradually turned into just one episode of the Great War, losing its individuality in official textbooks. The resonance of this story is felt even today. The Battle of Voronezh teaches us that there are no small or secondary events in history when it comes to the fates of hundreds of thousands of people. The tragedy of the city underscores the importance of the command's responsibility to its subordinates and the population. Today, we see a universal human truth in these events. True heroism often manifests where the most serious mistakes have been made. The lessons of Voronezh are a reminder that behind the brilliant facades of great victories always hide the gray ruins of forgotten feats and unspoken words of apology to those who were left alone against the enemy. The memory of this battle should serve as a warning against simplifying history and attempts to erase inconvenient facts for the sake of creating an idealized picture of the past. Returning to that scorching July day when the first smoke rose above the river, we now see not just the beginning of the battle for the city, but the start of a long process of the people realizing their strength amidst the complete collapse of familiar structures. That man on the left bank, watching his home perish, became a symbol of an entire generation that bore the weight of leadership's mistakes on its shoulders and turned defeat into the foundation of future revival. Voronezh did not just endure, it was reborn. But its scars, both visible in its architecture and invisible in historical memory, continue to tell us the truth. This truth is that no sacrifice should be forgotten, and no act, be it a feat or a display of weakness, should escape the judgment of time. The history of the city on the Don remains with us as a living testament that even the darkest pages of the past have the right to be read to the end, without omissions or abridgments. Concluding our journey through the ruins and trenches of 42, we see how the circle of time closes. Voronezh today is a flourishing metropolis, but in its foundation, the echo of those explosions and the voices of those who did not live to see the dawn in January 43 are forever entombed. We began with the enigma of a forgotten battle and came to understand that true glory is not always measured by the number of medals and newspaper mentions. It lives in the silence of memorials and in our readiness to seek the truth where it was attempted to be hidden. May this narrative be a tribute to those who held the defense on the banks of the Voronezh River, and a reminder to all of us that history is not only a list of dates, but, above all, the living fabric of human lives intertwined in the struggle for the right to a future. It is important to remember that every brick of the rebuilt city was laid on ground saturated with the sweat and blood of those who did not consider themselves heroes, but simply did their duty. Gazing at the modern streets, we must see through time the shadows of barricades, and hear in the noise of cars the echoes of distant cannon fire. This understanding makes us spiritually richer and more responsible to the memory of our ancestors. The tragedy, erased from official chronicles, has not actually disappeared anywhere. It lives in the family legends of Voronezh residents, in the names of streets, and in that special sense of pride felt by everyone who knows the true price of freedom. And if today we reopen these pages, it means that the time of oblivion has finally passed, giving way to a time of honest conversation about our shared past. The number of soldiers and civilians who perished in those days has not yet been precisely determined, and figures in various sources range from hundreds of thousands to almost 1 million people, if all operations in this direction are taken into account. This colossal scale of losses in itself answers the question of why people preferred not to speak loudly about this battle. To acknowledge such losses meant to acknowledge monstrous errors. But today, as we strive for the completeness of historical truth, these figures must be voiced aloud as a testament to the unparalleled patience and courage of our people. Every unit in this statistic is a song cut short, an unlived life, an unfulfilled dream, and our task is to ensure that these losses are not in vain in the eyes of future generations. Passing through the crucible of trials, the city forged its special character, which helped it to rise from the ashes in the shortest possible time after the end of hostilities. This was another miracle, a labor feat no less significant in scale than the military one. Women, old people, and children, returning to their native places, manually cleared debris, built housing from ruins, and restarted factories. This period of reconstruction also deserves to be remembered as an integral part of the Voronezh epic. The unity of the front and the rear manifested itself here in its sharpest and most direct form. The city not only returned to life, it became stronger, preserving in its heart the memory of those 148 days that changed everything. Concluding this narrative, one wants to believe that the lessons learned from analyzing the events in Voronezh of 1942 will help us to be more vigilant and appreciate the peace won at such a high price. History does not forgive oblivion, but it gives a chance to those who are ready to learn from its examples. The Battle of Voronezh, long in the shadow of the great Stalingrad, finally finds its rightful place in the pantheon of military glory, reminding us that every section of the front, every home, and every soldier made their invaluable contribution to the common victory. And in this highest sense, justice triumphs, returning to us the names of heroes and the truth about those harsh days when the fate of the whole world was decided. Thus, we see that the history of Voronezh is not only a history of destruction, but also a history of incredible creation and fidelity to duty. This is a story of how eternal memory is born from ashes and oblivion. And let this text serve as a small contribution to the restoration of historical justice, so that everyone who hears these lines feels involved in the great and tragic past of our people. For only by knowing the truth, however bitter it may be, can we confidently look to the future and build a world in which such tragedies will never be repeated. With this, we conclude our deep dive into one of the most mysterious and significant battles of the 20th century, leaving room for further reflection and research by each of you.